The committee will come to order. Today, the subcommittee will mark up the fiscal year 2014 Commerce, Justice, Science, and Related Agencies Appropriations Bill. The fiscal situation facing the nation requires significant spending reductions. If we are to succeed in putting the nation on secure fiscal footing, we will need to come together soon and put everything on the table, not just discretionary appropriations, but entitlement spending as well. In the meantime, this bill does our part by making significant reductions in discretionary spending while focusing limited resources on key federal priorities. At this point, I want to thank the ranking member, the gentleman from Pennsylvania and the great city of Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, Mr. Fattah. He's been an excellent partner at every step in our process, including providing vigorous oversight during our intensive hearing schedule. I look forward to continuing to work together as we move toward conference and the enactment of this bill. I also want to acknowledge the rest of the subcommittee members. The participation has been outstanding, and it's been a pleasure to work with everyone. I particularly wanted to say something about Mr. Bonner. He's not here, but I'm going to really miss Joe Bonner, some of the best questions that he asked, and so I think his leaving Congress will be a real loss, and I appreciate his service. Also want to recognize the subcommittee majority staff, Leslie Albright, Jeff Ashford, Colin Samples, Diana Simpson, and Mike Ringler, the staff director, and also Bob Bonner and Matt Smith from the minority staff for their work in preparing the bill before us today. Finally, I want to thank my classmate, the committee chairman from the class of 1980, the gentleman from Kentucky, who chaired this subcommittee for many years, and also the committee ranking member, Ms. Lowy, who has always been helpful and a constructive partner. The recommendation we bring to the subcommittee contains $47.4 billion in discretionary spending. This is 5.6% below the current fiscal year, 7.4% below the President's request, and less than 1% above the post-sequestration level. We have focused limited resources on critical areas, including law enforcement, national security, weather forecasting, and innovation and competitiveness. We have made every effort to mitigate the potential for furloughs, particularly in public safety agencies. However, until the President and the Congress agree to a plan to end sequestration and address mandatory spending, our ability to further mitigate furloughs is going to become limited. In the current fiscal year, the subcommittee has approved reprogramming proposals as necessary to help agencies manage program and personnel impacts resulting from sequestration. There are no furloughs at the Bureau of Prisons, at the FBI, at the Justice Department because of allowing them to rearrange. Also, the subcommittee repeatedly asked the Department of Commerce to reprogram funds to avoid furloughs in the National Weather Service, which it ultimately did after the deadly tornadoes in Oklahoma. So there were no furloughs at the Department of Commerce. Many of the sources from which the funds were reprogrammed in the current year will not be available in FY14, particularly for the Department of Justice. A grand bargain of some type to end sequestration and address mandatory spending will be necessary to solve the problem. To briefly describe some of the highlights of the bill today, the bill includes $7.5 billion for the Department of Commerce. The loss of life, tragedy, and economic disruption of severe weather has been all too evident recently. I'm pleased that this bill includes funding above the request for the National Weather Service operations, and a combined $1.8 billion for NOAA's 2 next-generation weather satellite systems to provide the data that is essential to accurate warnings and forecasts. The bill includes critical investments in manufacturing and job creation, including $120 million for manufacturing extension partnerships. The bill funds a task force and grant program to incentivize U.S. companies to bring their manufacturing and services activities back to the United States. The bill includes $7.7 billion for scientific research and related programs at NSF and NIST. Investments in scientific research are key to long-term economic growth and job creation and are the foundation for the security and the economic well-being of future generations. Developing a well-educated STEM workforce is also critical to American competitiveness, and more than $1 billion is provided throughout the bill for science education. For NASA, the bill includes $16.6 billion, including $3.6 billion for space exploration. This funding will keep NASA on schedule for upcoming flight milestones for the Orion crew vehicle and the Space Launch System. I'm also pleased to note that the bill includes $566 million for aeronautics research. Aerospace is a pillar of the American manufacturing sector, job creator, and this investment will boost our aviation competitiveness. The bill also includes $4.8 billion for NASA science programs. This amount restores cuts in the President's request that would have inhibited progress on planetary science goals, including missions to Mars and Europa. The bill provides $26.3 billion for the Department of Justice. The top mission priority of the Justice Department is defending national security from both internal and external threats. The bill also includes $8.6 billion for the FBI to protect the nation from terrorism and investigate federal crimes. Funding is increased above the FY13 level for top priority FBI programs, including investigative intelligence and technology improvements to prevent combat cyber intrusion, especially from the Chinese, which may soon overtake terrorism as the Bureau's #1 threat. The Bureau of Prisons operations are funded at $6.7 billion. The bill gives priority to the activation of recently constructed prisons and maintaining staffing levels to ensure safe and secure federal prison facilities. The bill creates a Chuck Colson task force on federal corrections. The task force will make recommendations to reform correction programs to increase public safety, improve offender accountability, reduce recidivism, and control costs. The bill includes $1.8 billion for justice grant programs, which is a reduction of $357 million below FY13. The bill prioritizes proven high-priority programs, including Burn Justice Assistance Grants, SCAP, Missing and Exploited Children programs, prescription drug monitoring, and the DNA grants. Funding for violence against women and victims of trafficking is increased. It's increased above the current level and above the President's request for each program. In the wake of the Newtown tragedy, the bill also includes important initiatives for keeping firearms out of the hands of prohibited persons and improving school safety. The NICS background check system is only effective if state records are complete and included. This bill includes $55 million for grants to improve NICS record, an increase of $37 million. The bill also includes $75 million for a new comprehensive school safety initiative run by the National Institute of Justice to identify and support best practices, and $3 million for the National Center for Campus Public Safety. This is a summary of the recommendations before you today. It represents the best take that we can do on matching the needs with this scarce resource. Before I recognize Mr. Fattah, I just want to say to Mr. Bonner, I had mentioned, Joe, how much I personally, I know I think everybody else will agree, miss you leaving. I think you're one of the best members that I've served with. I served here we've been here for 32 years. Thoughtful questions, really, really good, and I think, the University of Alabama, is going to be fortunate to get you, but, I appreciate your friendship and the contribution that you made. At this point, it's my intention to yield to Mr. Fattah, and then I'd like to yield to the full committee chairman, Mr. Rogers, and then to the full committee ranking member, Mrs. Lowy, if they have any comments to make. Mr. Fattah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to start where the chairman ended up, and our good friend is leaving us, and we have spent a number of years together here in the Congress. We traveled to Vienna to understand more fully the nuclear threat that Iran posed in terms of its weapons development program, meeting with the International Atomic Energy Agency there, and we've worked together on a number of issues. And so we want to wish you well as you go forward. Let me thank the chairman for his cooperation As we have developed this mark, it is true that the allocation is challenged and deficient in several respects, but that's above our pay grade, and it will be a resolution at some point. The Senate allocation is almost $5 billion above ours, but the chairman and I, one of the brave souls, two of the brave souls in the Congress who voted for Simpson Bowles, we believe that a fiscal resolution needs to be had so that we can focus on the priorities for the country. But I think that this mark, even though we could find areas where we would change the math slightly, it takes the best approach that is possible given the low allocation, given where we are. So I want to mention a couple of things and thank the chairman publicly for it, even though obviously I've talked to him privately about it. But this committee was the impetus for the neuroscience initiative I raised with the committee 2 years ago, and we put into the bill. And now we have a major initiative involving dozens of federal agencies looking at how we better understand the human brain and the 500 or so diseases and disorders that afflict tens of millions of Americans, and a whole range from mental health to traumatic brain injury and the like. And the bill today furthers that work and provides resources in the millions of dollars to continue that work through the National Science Foundation. I want to thank the chairman, and I believe this is going to have an extraordinary impact. Dr. Harris and I visited along with Eric Cantor over to NIH, and we've seen the beginnings of a major collaboration that the president has termed the BRAIN Initiative that I think has a great import for our country going forward. So there are a number of other priorities that the minority has that have been well addressed in the mark. There's some areas like legal services which we hope at some point we can improve the numbers, but in the manufacturing sector, which is a big priority for our country, there are initiatives like the reshoring initiative that the chairman championed to help companies better understand the financial benefit of manufacturing here in America, and the initiative that I led to bring technology from our taxpayer-funded national laboratories and other resources to bear to help small and medium manufacturers be able to maintain their footing and to improve their processes. So I could go on, but I think that enough has been said by myself and the chairman. We have begun the process. We know this bill will change as we go forward, and we believe it's important that we begin this process, however, so that the issues that are addressed in the bill can be part of the fuller discussion around appropriations as the year goes forward. So I thank the chairman. I thank his staff. Mike has done a great job working with my team, Bob and Matt, and I want to thank the majority for its cooperation in this effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fattah. Chairman Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, all of our subcommittees have been given scant numbers with which to deal. And it's a little bit like skating on a pond where you know there's some thin ice patches, and you try to keep your eye on the horizon and not look down. It's a bit like what Will Rogers, I think it was, said one time, if you're wearing spurs, don't squat. And Chairman Wolf and Mr. Fattah and the members of the subcommittee and staff have really skated around, I think, some thin ice patches, and have done a good job, I think, of bringing a bill that we all can enthusiastically support. We're confronted with a slow-moving economic recovery, unprecedented deficit spending, out-of-control debt. And with that, our committees have been tasked with putting forward appropriations bills that that more closely align our federal spending to the unsettling fiscal realities confronting the country. We've proceeded under regular order to produce measured and responsible legislation which right-sizes our government and puts us on a more sustainable trajectory for discretionary federal spending. The bill before us today is no exception. It includes, as the chairman says, $47.4 billion. That's $2.8 billion below the enacted level of 13, and an additional $1 billion below the president's budget request. And these cuts obviously were not easy. But given the aforementioned fiscal realities, compounded by a lack of leadership in addressing our ballooning entitlement programs, they're absolutely necessary. The chairman has taken pains to first root out extraneous, duplicative, unnecessary programs to save dollars while prioritizing some of the most critical aspects of government. Within the overall reduction, strategic increases are included for the federal law enforcement on the front lines who protect our citizens from criminals and terrorists at home and abroad, as well as the acquisition of our country's next generation of weather forecasting satellites. We've also continued to support critical programs which maintain the competitiveness of U.S. businesses and industries, and those which promote the scientific research that will help America continue to lead the world in innovation. These targeted investments will surely help grow our economy and create jobs. I'm also deeply grateful to the chairman for his support in this bill for efforts to bring under control our country's fastest growing drug threat, the abuse of prescription drugs, which the Center for Disease Control has said was a national epidemic. We saw last week a new report that more American women now die of overdoses from pain pills like OxyContin than from cervical cancer or homicide. In 1 decade, fatal overdoses more than quintupled among women, more than tripled among men, and more people are dying from prescription drug abuse than car wrecks. And this senseless loss of life has to end. This legislation provides the DEA and U.S. attorneys with the resources to investigate and prosecute the so-called dealers in white coats running rogue pain clinics, supports struggling addicts and our soldiers returning from war through recovery with drug and veterans courts, and contains funding for vital tools like state-run prescription monitoring programs that help physicians make more informed decisions when prescribing these powerful medications. Every state now, except Missouri, has a prescription monitoring program that allows prescribing doctors, pharmacists, and in some cases law enforcement, the chance to see who is prescribing what medicines and how much and how often. Now those state systems are linking together and providing across-state line information to the same extent in an effort to prevent doctor shopping and double filling of prescriptions. So this subcommittee has been at the forefront of that from the very beginning. And I want to thank the chairman for his long effort and the ranking member and others on the committee for their long efforts in this regard. It's testament to the diligence of this subcommittee and the chairman that we've been able to maintain funding for these programs and projects of vital importance to our nation and its future competitiveness, while also realizing significant savings for the taxpayer. So I congratulate the chairman and ranking member and members of the subcommittee and staff for a good job on a good bill that we can all heartily recommend. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Lowy, ranking member.
Thank you very much, Chairman Wolf, Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member, Mr. Fattah. I really do want to thank you for your leadership and the collegiality which has been evident in this process. And I do hope, Chairman Rogers, we can clean up that ice skating rink and get rid of that patch of ice over there, because I think it is within the power of the people of this room and the Congress to do so. And in fact, I do want to also express good wishes to Mr. Bonner and his wonderful smile. And I know you're looking forward to the next phase of your life, and it's been a pleasure working with you and getting to know you. Before I focus on the bill, both Chairman Rogers and Chairman Wolf referenced putting entitlement on the table. And I think most of us would agree on that premise. I've been hearing this claim over and over again that the president is unwilling to negotiate on entitlements. Apparently, many have forgotten about the president's offer to Speaker Boehner before the Republican leader walked away from negotiations last December, and I understand they were this close. The president included his deficit reduction proposal, which would replace sequestration in the FY14 budget, his FY14 budget. And it built upon the $2.5 trillion in deficit reduction that Congress has passed and the president has signed. The Obama compromise includes an additional $1.5 trillion in savings. Frankly, it's very puzzling to me that members of this committee would claim the president doesn't have a plan after the Republican speaker walked away from the president's compromise offer last year and then reiterated his plan in the budget request. So I think it's important as we make these comments that we review what happened in December, we review the president's budget request and get on with it. Because I know, as a member of this Appropriation Committee for a very long time, our chairs and our ranking members don't want to waste this time putting together a budget that won't become reality, and we know it's deficient, as good as it is in many ways. So I do hope we can move forward, Republican, Democrat, and the White House, getting together and really getting this done. Now, a couple of remarks about the actual bill, because you worked so hard on it, and I particularly appreciate your work on the brain. I attended several autism walks, Alzheimer's walk, and they know so little, and they're really waiting for this research to show us the way forward. So I really thank the chair and the ranking member for your work on that. And the bill does provide good funding levels for a number of important efforts in addition, such as Violence Against Women Act services, the National Weather Service, the Burn Justice Assistance Grant programs. I thank you for your work on that. The mark includes $75 million for a comprehensive school safety program, despite the fact that it was half of the request to add school resource officers and improve security in our schools based on the needs of local communities. In addition, it would provide $55 million in grants to states to improve the records for the National Instant Background Check System. However, Congress has yet to pass bipartisan, common sense gun violence prevention measures. 7 months after the tragedy at Newtown. This mark preserves the status quo as it retains the same gun riders as last year, rather than work together to reduce the epidemic of violence and the prevalence of illegal guns. Like most of the other subcommittees, this panel is faced with an inadequate allocation that is $4.7 billion, or 7.5% below the president's request. Numerous vital efforts would not receive adequate resources. For example, while federal law enforcement is funded above post-sequestration levels, Some special agents and attorneys who prevent, investigate, prosecute acts of crime and terrorism will likely face furloughs under this allocation. The COPS hiring program is zeroed out. Had it been funded, the administration's request would have provided grants to support the hiring of 8,310 officers. While the bill increases funding for the National Weather Service to predict and warn the public of severe weather events, reductions to components of NOAA, including coastal zone management grants, will make it more difficult for communities to prepare, mitigate, and recover from storms, leaving out shorelines and coasts more at risk. We cannot meet the needs of federal law enforcement, prosecute criminals, or protect public safety with an allocation this low. Without first replacing the sequester, research by NASA and the National Science Foundation efforts to study and combat climate change, and economic priorities such as the Minority Business Development Administration, trade adjustment assistance will all be limited. It is my sincere hope that we can replace the sequester once and for all and improve this bill as the process moves forward. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Lowy. Any comments or anything from any of the members? Mr. Schiff.
Mr. Chairman, I'll be very brief. I just wanted to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to thank our ranking member for your strong advocacy for planetary science for Mars and Europa. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Fattah, you've been consistent and wonderful supporters, and the great many brilliant people working in this area are deeply appreciative. And I particularly want to thank you for the very strong report language that I want to read, because I think it's so powerful and important. On planetary science, NASA has once again proposed damaging and disproportionate reductions in the planetary science budget without any substantive justification. At the requested level, which represents a cut of more than 7% below a post-sequester level, NASA would be unable to meet the major scientific goals of the Planetary Science Decadal Survey in a timely manner, lose its role as the international leader in the field, drive uniquely qualified and promising talent out of the field, perhaps permanently, and increase the risk level on existing projects due to the inefficient phasing of funds. The committee's recommendation seeks to address these shortcomings while also achieving programmatic balance among project destinations and sizes. Very powerful language, and I think a very important message both for the House and Senate to deliver that planetary science is important to the American people and the Congress. So, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you again. I also wanted to echo your comments and others about Mr. Bonner. It's a great mixed emotion that we see you going on to do other wonderful things. It's been a real privilege to work with you, and we would be very lucky to have a lot more members like you. So just want to wish you all the best. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Schiff. Any member?
Mr. Chairman, I also want to just thank you for your support for the sciences, for NASA. It's been steadfast throughout your tenure as chairman of this subcommittee. All of us on this subcommittee are here because of our passion, not only for the country, but for the investment that needs to be made in our future through investments through the National Science Foundation, through NASA, through Planetary. You've been there for all of them, for NIST, and we deeply, deeply appreciate your commitment and that of the ranking member as well. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Colbert.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Serrano?
Mr. Chairman, I had the good fortune, the opportunity, and my own markup as ranking member this morning, a few minutes ago, to bid farewell momentarily to Joe Bonner and to remind the world what a great guy I think he is, and he knows he's not on the list of the people I wanted to leave Congress. Just none in this committee, but and I take the privilege of being the only member of this committee who was ranking member to both you, Chairman Wolf, and you, Chairman Rogers, at different times, and we've worked together, and I appreciate the work you've done with ranking member Fattah. Two brief comments on the work you've done. I hope as the process goes through, we can do something better for the Legal Services Corporation. It's a great program. I know it's a program we all support. interestingly enough, a program that's been around for a long, long time from a Republican president who felt that people should be protected at all times. So I hope that as we go along, we do this. And while it might be little noticed, this is a very historic moment, or the beginning of a historic process. And I want to thank Ranking Member Fatah and yourself, Chairman Wolf, for including the language that the President asked for regarding a vote to determine the political status of Puerto Rico. As you know, I was born in the territory, or the colony, as some would think. It's been 115 years that Puerto Ricans have been waiting for Congress, not themselves. They've done it a few times, for Congress to say, have a vote. And since the issue always is statehood, it should be noted for the members of the committee that the party in control of both houses of the legislature and the governorship is not the statehood party, and so they will be charged with the responsibility of writing the ballot. The bill calls, the language calls for the Justice Department to look at the ballot and determine that it's constitutional, and it doesn't commit us to anything but to take it up, and that's why I think it's a fair approach. They vote after 115 years. They tell us what they wish for themselves. We then take it up, and maybe we can begin the process of ending this colonial status that has existed for 115 years. And so, as a member of Congress, but personally, as an American, I thank you, because I do find myself in that unique situation of having been born in the territory and now serving in the Congress that holds, if you will, the territory. And so to me, this is very important, and I thank you for allowing the language to stay in. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Mr. Rogers, Chairman.
I can't let this opportunity pass to also say thank you to Joe Bonner for the great service he's rendered to this committee, this subcommittee, to the Congress and to the country. And I'm sure Alabamans will welcome him home to his new chores at the university with open arms, but we will wish him adieu with great sadness, because he's been such a great member, a great friend, a great mentor to me, an advisor, pal. And so, Joe, we're going to miss you. And it's remarkable the number of members on both sides of the aisle who are so entranced with your friendship, as we all are, and all of us, I'm sure, would want to have these kinds of things said about us when we leave this place. I'll repeat something I said at the earlier markup this morning. Another Will Rogers saying. He says, if you don't go to other people's funerals, they won't come to yours. This is not a funeral by any stretch, but it is sadness that we're losing Joe to our cause here on the Hill. So good luck to you. God bless.
Mr. Adderall, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also appreciate the work that you and the ranking member have added or put into this bill, and it's certainly a good bill, especially concerning the overall budget situation, as the full chairman has mentioned. Along with the large accounts, there's a lot of programs that are much smaller, yet they're very significant. I continue to be in support of the designation of some of the DA funding to assist the local and the state law enforcement cleanup for the waste sites created by meth labs. These groups of criminals often span state lines, and so the funding is especially helpful. Also want to mention the $19 million for the Victims of Child Abuse account, also a very important account. Regarding NASA, which is an important part of this bill, there is a lot of good oversight in this bill and report. I appreciate NASA's positive comments this year regarding the SLS and the progress on the core vehicle. I think the real concern that so many have is the agency continues to request an insufficient amount of funds, and there could be more work, I believe, on two elements: the upper stage of sufficient power and the work on the advanced booster program. A completed SLS gives us a launch capability far exceeding other current and planned vehicles. It provides sufficient payload ability for human missions, cuts travel time for mission sites, missions by as much as 2/3 and opens the door to partnerships with commercially funded projects. So the bottom line is we can't afford to fall behind other nations in this launch capability. And finally, I want to thank, I think it's important that we'll continue to create as much transparency and oversight as possible regarding the Space Act agreements and the various services needed to comply with International Space Station. I also want to join and mention about missing our colleague Joe Bonner. The one good thing that may come out of this is I may end up gaining Joe as a constituent through this, so he may be moving into my district. My only concern is if he doesn't like his job and decides to run for Congress. May not be well for me, but I know he is going to enjoy his job, and I want to do everything I can to make sure he does. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman?
Ms. Lowy?
Go ahead. I'll
I was just going to follow up with another quote from Will Rogers, Mr. Chairman. I may make it up a little bit, but essentially what he would say at this time is this is the powerful Appropriations Committee. Everyone on this committee is looking forward to moving forward and conferencing with the Senate because we know of the importance of this bill. So I would just hope we can get on with it. When I heard of the important research that is done here, and then on the other committee on which I serve, well, now we serve on all of them, Labor, Health, Human Services, the work we do at the NIH complements the work you do here, and it is so important. And I had a meeting this week with some researchers, one of the major research institutions. And you know what this woman told me? That things have come to a standstill because they don't know when their next grant is going to come. They don't know what size that grant will be. And they are losing young, brilliant people who would have come into this institution. So I'm sure what Will Rogers would say is, get on with this. We can't afford to waste time from July, August, September, October, November. I'd love to spend New Year's Eve with you, Mr. Chairman, but I do think we are the Appropriations Committee, and we have to take this power of persuasion and get on with it.
And I'm sure
I just couldn't resist.
And I'm sure the gentlelady will aid us in that cause by voting for these bills.
Mr. Hunter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I wanted to pass forward so we can vote on a conference bill that I'm sure will meet your expectations, sir.
Mr. Hunter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also want to add my thanks to you and to our ranking member for the work you've done. And given the size of the funds that you had to work with, it had to be a very terrible process to go through. And Chairman Rogers, I don't know. Are you related to Will?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
You're not related to Will Rogers, are you?
Are you related to Will Rogers?
First cousins.
First cousins, all right. I just want to make it clear that
I'm his uncle.
you don't appear to be that common, though. But as a horse rider, I never wore spurs, so I guess I never had to worry about squatting. So I just want to thank you for that comment. And I just want to let you know that I'm not feeling any pressure at all to say, you know, we're going to miss you or anything else like that because everybody else said it. But since you're going to an institution of higher learning, and you know how this process works, you probably find ways to get more money for your institutions besides your smile. But I know that we as colleagues, as we spend time together in these subcommittees, that this is probably the only place that we get to know each other more intimately than we do on the floor. So I do appreciate this process and our ability to work together. There are a number of prioritizations that have been made in this bill that I found problematic, and I understand the situation that the leadership have found themselves in. There are problems faced by agencies within our jurisdictions that this bill will not solve, and there are provisions in this bill that make it harder for U.S. companies trying to do business in both our own market and in the foreign markets to sell their products to the agencies covered by this bill. In the interest of time, I'll just mention a few of these provisions. As the chairman knows, this spring the Office of Management and Budget arrived at an interpretation of the law that would apply sequestration to the Patent and Trademark Office, despite the fact that USPTO derives its revenues from fees and not from taxpayers' dollars. So this was included in the fiscal year 2013 work plan and would continue if sequestration is applied in future years. But during the debate on the American Invent Acts, there was a lot of back and forth on how to secure that USPTO had access to all of its fee revenue and that fees were no longer diverted. We've done some work on that. And there are suggestions that USPTO should be taken off budget. But members and leaders of this committee fought to keep PTO in the appropriations process while promising that fees would not be diverted again, and yet here we are less than 2 years later seeing fee diversion. I understand that we as a Congress need to fix sequestration overall, and I wholeheartedly support the efforts to do that, but we on this committee have a special responsibility to fix its impact on USPTO, since some of us had an outsized role in making it vulnerable to sequestration. But this bill does not do so, which means that the Patent and Trademark Office will not be able to hire new examiners and judges, will not be able to upgrade technology needed to improve services for applicants, and will be forced to delay the opening of the planned satellite offices, all of which will harm innovators across this country and our economy and job creation. I plan to offer an amendment at full committee to hopefully address this problem. There are other shortcomings in this bill as well. While I'm grateful to the chairman for including $165 million for the State Criminal Alien Assistance Program, SCAP, after it was zeroed out once again in the president's budget, because we can't keep playing this budget game year after year. And I know that we know this. And it is a game for the states, counties, and cities that are bearing the cost for the federal responsibilities and not getting reimbursed. It means that they can't do the job they're supposed to be doing, keeping the public safe, providing services to meet the needs of local communities, repairing roads and others. So we must start to live up to the commitment made when SCAP was created, or else relieve our communities of this unfunded mandate. There's a provision in this bill that continues a policy started in the FY13 continuing resolution that places restrictions on the acquisition of information technology systems by Department of Commerce and Justice, NASA, and NSF. And I understand that the chairman is concerned about cyber threats, but I do not believe that this provision is the best way to achieve this goal. It gives our international competitors justification for erecting market access barriers against U.S.-based companies, and its vague wording is causing different interpretation and inconsistent application that is hampering progress on federal contracts and projects. I believe we would be better served by taking a holistic approach to information technology security that is risk-based, transparent, flexible, and standards-based, so that other nations cannot use our efforts to improve cybersecurity as an excuse to exclude U.S. products. Finally, it's disappointing that we have not been able to do more in this bill to support the President's proposal for National Network for Manufacturing Innovation, better known as NNMI. And Mr. Chairman, I know we share a belief that domestic manufacturing is critical for growing the American economy, and that we should be working to promote advanced manufacturing in the U.S. And I realize that the NNMI proposal requires action by the authorizing committee, but I hope that we can provide the necessary support as authorization legislation works its way through the legislative process. And I hope that we can work together to address these and other challenges that our nation faces as this bill works its way through the process to full committee and beyond. And let me close, Mr. Chairman, by also adding my thanks to your great interest on weather satellites and making sure that we're able to anticipate things like that happened in Fukushima, and be able to deploy this kind of technology throughout our different oceans so that we'll be able to make people safe. And I still think that people still remember your efforts after the tsunami that hit and devastated India. And the neurological research is going to help our friend Bonner and the universities. I know that. So he'll probably be coming back for more money to play on our, willingness to help them out in the neurological research. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I would just comment, thank the gentleman for the comments. Every member ought to read you ought to read the Intel report that Mr. Rogers and Ruppersberger did on Huawei and ZTE. The Chinese are stealing unbelievable amount. Every member, I would urge every member here, and I appreciate the chairman taking the time to go out and look at the FBI briefing and see what companies and law firms and foundations are being stripped of major technology. And so I think everyone should read the Intel and everyone should have the FBI brief. On the PTO, we've been very sympathetic to PTO. We're going to try to help you with your office. If they're telling you they can't open it, they're not telling you the truth. Here's the situation. OMB said they are covered by sequestration. They write the rules, and we can't. Secondly, if we had added that in, that's $150 million that we would have had to take from other programs that other members are interested in. Thirdly, the PTO gets a 5% increase in this bill above last year. And so if they tell you that they don't have the money to open up the office, and I told you that I support you in that effort,
Sure.
Come by and we'll sit down with them. But they do have the money, and there is no excuse for them not to open up next year because they're getting a 5% increase. And if you look at some of the other agencies that have been hit, so they ought to open up your office. You ought to be there for when they open it. There's no excuse. But had we taken that $150 million, all the other programs would have been, and so we had to go by the guidelines of the OMB. So,
would it be that it's a function of GSA working with PTO and that they're not able to secure a place so that they can?
Well, I don't know about securing. That's there, but they have the ability, and under this budget, there's no reason for them not to open up your office.
Sure. I would love to work with you, Mr. Chairman, on this. Thank you.
Mr. Bonner.
Mr. Chairman, I had not intended to speak, but since so many people said so many nice things, I wanted to thank you all from the bottom of my heart for the heartfelt comments that have been offered. They've certainly been received by me with a tremendous amount of gratitude for the friendships that I've been fortunate enough to make over the years. One group that will not have a chance to speak into the microphones are the people that work oftentimes in the shadows of the spotlight that we are sometimes under, and that's the men and women of the professional staff of the committee, the subcommittee, and also the associate staff. And as someone who worked on the staff with such great pride for 18 years, I want to say a special thanks to the people that work with us for the American people. They do tireless work, and this is a product of their work. So I would certainly be remiss if I didn't recognize them. This is the important work of our nation. And just listening to the chairman and the ranking member talk about some of the things that are in this bill, both the chairman and ranking member of the subcommittee, but also of the full committee as well. You know, weather satellites, prisons, prescription drug abuse, studies of the brain. Unfortunately, those are not sexy issues that make the headlines. We'll watch the morning news and spend days, weeks talking about why a celebrity named a child why they did. And that's so unfortunate because the work that we are doing in this bill reflects the important work not only of our nation but that the world looks to America for. And while I could say something about each and every one here, I would be especially remiss if I didn't talk for just a moment before I go to the motion, unless there's someone else that the chair recognizes, about the passion, the principled leadership and voice, whether it's on human rights or on fiscal sanity, of Chairman Wolf. There is not, our party had a guy named Teddy Roosevelt who became a champion for the environment before that became popular. And there have been many members on both sides, I think about Tom Lantos and others who became a voice of leadership on human rights. but no one brings such passion and conviction as Chairman Wolf. So it has been a tremendous honor serving on this subcommittee with you and with all of you. And I'm also reminded of the scene from The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, where Tom and Huck were listening to what was believed to be their funerals. And after they saw the entire church congregation break down in tears, they came out to remind everyone they were alive. So I am alive. This is not a funeral, but with a profound amount of gratitude, I appreciate the members of this committee and the members, and as the ranking member said, this is the Appropriations Committee. This is the committee that every one of us at some chapter in our life in Congress worked our hearts out to become a member of, because we knew we could do good for the American people. It is a committee that still does good, and I've been honored to be a part of it. So thank you so much.
I yield now to the Vice Chairman, Mr. Bonner, for a motion.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
if I could just have a minute.
I apologize. Mr. Harris.
Thank you very much. And I'll be very brief, but it's just a follow-up on an issue of concern that was brought up during one of the hearings. We are the Appropriations Committee. We are expected to fund the executive branch, which unfortunately I think is having an increasing pattern of disregarding the will of Congress and most recently the will of the law itself, disregarding the law itself. The situation was, as you may recall, we had the Attorney General appear on April 18th. Shortly after, a subpoena was issued to Assistant Attorney General Perez, requesting personal emails that were used for official business, and which we didn't know at the time. The night before, they had actually, the Department of Justice had communicated with the Oversight Committee and indicated that, in fact, 1,200 times personal emails were used for referring to or relating to official business, and yet only 34 had been allowed to be viewed at the Department of Justice by the committee. Mr. Chairman, that, if you might recall, the Attorney General at that time said that the subpoena had been complied with. Because my question to him was, as the Attorney General of the country, was he going to recognize the importance and legality of a congressional subpoena to one of his employees? And he dismissed it as the subpoena was complied with. Well, Mr. Chairman, it was not complied with. In fact, it still is not being complied with.
Is this a subpoena issued by our subcommittee?
No, I said the Committee on Oversight.
Okay, well, this is a subcommittee on appropriations, so...
Well, Mr. Ranking Member, I believe you were there. You were there at the hearing. This is about, and this is the exact issue. We fund the Department of Justice. We are funding currently an employee who is not responsive to a congressional subpoena and has not been responsive for 3 months. So, Mr. Ranking Member, I would beg to differ. That is exactly the purpose of this Appropriations Committee, is to see that taxpayer funds paying a highly paid public employee who is disregarding the will of Congress in contradiction to the Constitution, which says that the Mr. Ranking Member, I will yield in a minute. Okay. The Constitution, which says that the purpose of the executive branch is to carry out the will of Congress and the law. Now, Mr. Perez still has not complied with this subpoena 3 months later. And, Mr. Chairman, I'll ask you a brief question, because we wrote a letter about a week and a half later to the Attorney General asking him just to, and I will quote from the letter, that we want him to be clarifying his testimony. His testimony to the subcommittee was that the subpoena was complied with. It has come to light, again, 1,200 times emails were used, personal emails. And, Mr. Chairman, when I chaired the Committee on Energy and Environment Subcommittee and the Science Committee, we had this problem with EPA, where Administrator Jackson was using a personal email account, or since it was named after her dog, I'm not sure we should call it a personal email account, to actually send emails regarding official activity in what appears to be an attempt to violate the Records Act. Mr. Chairman, this is serious. So I'm going to yield just to ask you a question. Did you receive a reply from the Attorney General?
I think we may, I better check so I don't say something.
We both sent the letter, Mr. Chairman, and
Yeah,
I didn't receive one.
But let me, I'm not sure, but let me just
Okay.
check.
I would appreciate you checking because
We'll
I'm...
let you know within an hour.
Thank you
I'll
very
let
much, Mr. Chairman, because again, this committee is charged with paying the salary of every federal employee, and they really should comply with the will of Congress, especially a subpoena to a committee. And thank you. I yield back.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
if I could be recognized before the motion.
Sure.
And I appreciate the doctor's concerns in this regard. It's impossible for our subcommittee to deal with the business that's being conducted in other subcommittees. We don't have a copy of the subpoena. We don't know the nature of the response. It's difficult for us to make a judgment. So I wouldn't want to be a party to disparaging individuals in the public about noncompliance with a lawful subpoena, having no basis, no evidence in front of us. So I just want to, at least for our side of the aisle, separate myself and our side from any notion that we would condemn individuals on the basis of no evidentiary information in front of our subcommittee. So I appreciate your concern. I understand you serve on another committee, and but I thank the chairman, and I'd be glad to proceed to the motion.
Mr. Bonner.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the chairman's mark be reported to the full committee.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The bill is reported out. I ask unanimous consent that the staff be given the authority to make technical and conforming changes to the items approved today without objection, so ordered. If there is no further business, the committee stands adjourned.